Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the first ever Q&A session. One of our, I'm presuming, subscribers here on the YouTube channel was good enough to invest time in putting in comments and asking questions. Thus far, it seems to be the same individual by the name of Tom, as he identifies himself in the comment section here. There is a username here, rcolda. I do apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I've never been good with usernames in particular. So what I'm going to attempt here is, because Tom has invested quite a bit of time in not only viewing the content, but in responding to the content, and I feel it's only fair that I respond to some of his questions and or concerns. So that's what we will attempt to do today. I am in my home office as we record this, so if you're hearing a bunch of stuff in the background, it's because my children are present and my wife is working next to me. So I apologize for any interruptions in advance. Let's jump right in here, because this is probably going to be a fairly lengthy video. Let's go ahead and jump right in here. Tom writes under episode 1, How to Invest Your Time Wisely. Great example about the IRS and the value of working with an experienced / knowledgeable / honest agent who can represent the buyer. Many of the MLS listings do not identify the model name, and almost none contain a floor plan, a 3D walkthrough, proximity to power lines / noise, and other less desirables. A video posted recently shows a bedroom without a closet, which seems contrary to how most boards of realtors define bedroom. In the woke world today, maybe the room just identified as a bedroom, even though it has forever been just a den. This is more of a statement, obviously, and I appreciate Tom sharing his thoughts here. But let's address a couple things in here that I think could be expanded upon. So first, Tom writes, almost none of them contain a floor plan, talking about open houses and or listings upon viewing. The reason for that, just so everyone is aware, the reason that typically we don't display an open house floor plan or a floor plan with the property is that those floor plans are owned by the developer, the artist renderings that they are. And so technically they are copyrighted and should not be utilized for commercial purposes unless it's being done by the developer. And that's why you typically won't see that in a home presentation. A 3D walkthrough. This kind of falls into the realm of ever expanding services and what is considered to be the norm in terms of marketing. We've looked at, my wife in particular has been a big advocate for this 3D walkthrough thing. The problem that I run into is that this is yet just another expense to essentially accommodate what exists with the virtual tour. Granted, it's not 3D. I think it's a really cool technology. But in my experience, when I've looked into this, it's not something that I can buy a la carte for the listing. I have to get the full photo package that is bundled together. And for me to pay that kind of money out when all I really want is the 3D part just doesn't always make sense. And some homes they're not terribly complicated. So investing in that may or may not make sense depending upon the listing. Let's see here. Proximity to power lines, noise, and other undesirables. So there is an aspect of being a realtor where we have to kind of straddle a line where we have disclosure requirements by the state, but we also have a continuous responsibility not to stigmatize the property, right? And this kind of ties into why we're using an agent to begin with, right? We want to highlight the positives, and if there are going to be objections to particularly exterior elements like this that can't be modified, We want to address those on a one-on-one basis whenever possible. We really can't be putting this type of information out in marketing. Proximity to power lines and other undesirable things. I understand Tom's frustration here. I do, because from one perspective, you could interpret this as being misleading or at the very least withholding critical information for consideration. It's a balancing act, and everybody's going to kind of approach it a little differently. I can tell you that there is a line that if you cross it as a professional, you're probably going to hear from one of these governing bodies. So, excuse me. Bedroom without a closet. Yeah, so I understand what Tom is saying here about the bedrooms without the closet thing. Historically, there's been a handful of floor plans that this has kind of been an issue around. Of them, the gardenia is always really the challenge, and a lot of this comes from the owners, because we don't like to acknowledge that our home is inferior in some kind of way, right? The lack of a defined bedroom versus what constitutes a den makes folks feel less than. But this has been an ongoing issue for quite a while. Part of the issue used to be the mechanics of the search engines, right? There wasn't a 2-2 den category, so if you didn't label it as a 3-2, however disingenuous that might be, it would not show up in a search. And because the MLS works in such ways that we are collaborating and we are sharing inventory for consideration, if it doesn't show up in a search, it's kind of being shot in the foot. It's an unfair disadvantage in the open market. So that, from what I understand, has been looked at and possibly addressed here recently, at least with our particular MLS services in the villages. But no, this is very much a continuous struggle between the definition and the practical mechanics, and really what's fair for the owner in the listing. I can't comment on the woke thing, but I understand it's humor. He's being funny, and I appreciate that. All right, let's move on to the next one here. Tom, once again, in episode 2, when is the best time to buy? Writes, you talk about when to buy in supply and demand. Might that timing logic also apply to supply/demand/ listing prices of homes that the Villages is building/selling? Seems like if the Villages is completing new homes as fast as possible, their demand might also soften in the hot months, resulting in a flat or lowered pricing. What trend analysis have you seen? I'm not entirely sure I follow the question. Seems like if the Villages is completing new homes as fast as possible, that their demand might also soften because the inventory is inflating. So I think what he's asking is that, are there times of the year where the inventory inflates and therefore the cost of a home comes down? I think that's what the question is. I'm going to try my best to answer this. So when I worked with the developer many, many, many years ago, basically the trend was neighborhoods would get released. And if there was a neighborhood that was struggling to get closed out, they would hold off on releasing the next neighborhood. So in this way, they would manipulate the new home inventory to make sure that demand remained somewhat high. Through Lake Sumter Landing in Brownwood, a lot of that home assignment on home sites was done well in advance. I can't speak to Sector 6 and Sector 7 necessarily, but long story short, they are conscious of having too much inventory on the market at one given time. Now, where you might start to see some price reducing in the new home category, okay, Yeah. So as I said, we're going to have a few interruptions with the kids in the house. Um, but jumping back into this, typically what you'll see in the new home category in terms of price reduction is if a neighborhood is having a hard time closing out, they'll start applying discounts. Usually, when a neighborhood gets released, the most desirable, rarest home scenarios will sell first. So these are your oversized home sites, homes that have views, homes that back up to some type of water feature. Your interior home sites in their respective homes, they'll sell fairly consistently throughout that time frame. What you will oftentimes see is that homes that have a less than super desirable scenario um, will be the remainder balance, and thus they'll start getting discounted. Now, how does that come into play? There's another aspect of this where how does new home impact pre-owned home in terms of pricing? And there is some correlation, but not as much as you might think. And I'm only going to address this because the way that the question was structured, I think Tom is talking about a broader market influence here. New home used to be very dominant um, when it came to being a competitor in the market space for a pre-owned home to compete against. What I've always told folks was you as an individual owner will never compete against new home. You'll never win that. Okay. The developer can throw these homes up. They got it down to a science. There's a lot more profitability built into a new home sale for the developer than you will necessarily recognize as a private owner. Thus, you cannot price compete with new home. New home has its drawbacks too, but that's not really where this question is coming into play. Years and years ago, they used to directly compete with another. Now, given where new home is currently as the time of recording this, it's not influencing or affecting Lake Sumter Landing or Brownwood all that much. It's certainly not going to impact the northern sections of the community. Anyone who's considering a new home um, based on their current location isn't also likely to be considering a home in one of these other areas of the villages because the villages is such a large geographical space. You just don't have the same buyer pool in all these spaces. That's why the market has become somewhat more segmented here as of late. Um, I hope that answers the question. If the question was more along the lines of timing throughout the year and whether or not home inventory inflates, the reality there is that the inventory inflates during season, right? And prices go up during season. And a lot of that has to do with the perception of more swoller buyer pool, right? But those folks tend to be locked into a specific product type for a very specific reason. And there's some mishandling happening there, just a lack of understanding. Probably why I do the Insight series to begin with. All right, so let's move on to the next one. Okay, on episode 3, how the bond affects you in the villages, specifically how it affects your decision making. Um, this has kind of been an ongoing thing as well. Tom writes, Chris, interesting discussion when comparing new to older village homes, bonds, and expected expenditures. Many realtors want a listing commission, but are unable or too inexperienced to talk about costs with potential buyers. For a 1,800 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath home, what have you seen lately as typical costs to replace A, a roof, B, an HVAC, C, a hot water tank, D, appliances, E, flooring slash carpet slash tile, F, to screen in or glass a lanai, G, kitchen and counter upgrades, H, bathroom updates, and I, any other major items over $1,000. Budgeting major items can be critical to making an informed choice. Thank you, Tom. You're absolutely right, Tom. Um, here's the issue that I'm going to run into here. I'm not going to go into numbers in this video. Suffice it to say that yes, these are considerations. This list of items here are considerations, value points, if you will. And being able to draw those out and present them to a prospective buyer is important. Can we and will we have these conversations on a one-on-one basis when considering a home? Absolutely, happens almost every time. But I can't, because this is going to go on the internet. I can't, even with ranges. It would be a bad idea for me to verbalize some of these price groups, and I'm sure my wife would not appreciate me attempting to do so. Interesting discussion. Yes. So budgeting and setting expectations about the realities of the cost of the home are important. They're very important. Um, Sometimes the challenge that I run into is I'm a little too fast with this. I'm a little too early with it. Um, really need to be establishing that there's a strong interest in the property initially before we start talking about adjusting or modernizing and the costs associated with that. So something I'm working on, something I'm trying to get better at. We have a second comment here from Joe LaRose on episode 3. Great presentation. I would also add that when purchasing an older, no bond home, you should check if the roof and HVAC unit were replaced and when. I purchased a home in Spanish Springs that was built in 1999. The roof and HVAC were replaced in 2020 and 2021, respectively. I did reply to that one in writing, but I will say this: there has been a period of time here where, because the insurance companies have taken a position of pushing back on the idea of insuring anything with a 15-year roof or older, this has kind of changed the conversation. And for me personally, when I'm doing a home search or if I'm developing my hot list to share with my folks, I don't qualify a home for consideration in my inventory unless it has a qualifying roof. Being defined as 15 years or younger. In the event that a roof is within, and of course this is going to depend on the product type too, if a roof is within 3 to 4 years of hitting that 15-year mark, that's going to be a conversation and something we're going to want to be aware of. Because it can be a pretty substantial cost, and we need to take that into a consideration when we're putting together an offer. This can spin out into a conversation of whether or not it's fair to take the total price of a replacement item off of the offer, and realistically, would that even work versus a Village's seller? And I do qualify the statement Village's seller because this is not the same kind of marketplace as outside of the Villages, and there's a lot that goes into that statement that I'm not going to overly explain at this point. Let's keep moving. Okay, and it looks like we took a little time off for a few episodes, and then we came back in episode 7. What you are really buying? What you're really buying in the Villages? So this was about lifestyle elements. Tom wrote in, your description of the golf course funding and amenities fee is interesting. I had thought the executive courses were maintained solely by part of the amenities fee, and the championship courses, where that land is owned by the Village's development company, were maintained by revenue solely from the fees charged to play golf. And the revenue from the championship, restaurant, and pro shop activities. The Village's development company has demolished some buildings near a championship course near Spanish Springs and is building apartments or other commercial properties. I'm now concerned about buying a home that faces a golf course. If the Village's development company or the golf division you mentioned can close a golf course and simply build and sell or rent apartments or commercial businesses in that space, that would have been my golf view. What entity actually owns the land where the executive courses and championship courses are located? And are they deed restricted so that they must always remain that type of course use? Thank you, Tom. Tom, this is a deep question, buddy. Here's okay. So I'll start with this. I don't, off the top of my head, know who owns the golf courses in terms of the land. It would be reasonable to suspect that that's probably owned by the development. Um, in working on that assumption, I understand your concern because this is really about risk assessment, right? It's if I invest this, $80,000 to $125,000 home site premium for this view site where this home is, am I guaranteed that that investment will continue on in perpetuity? And here we're asking specifically if they are deed restricted. I have a hard time imagining from a historical perspective that the developer would have any type of language in a deed restriction that would inhibit their ability to repurpose the land that they own. This would be more in the realm of county zoning than it would be necessarily deed restrictions, I suspect. Um, we're diving into some stuff that's a little bit beyond the scope of my profession. That would be more or less what I would have to say on that. I don't believe that there are any deed restrictions that prevent anyone from redeveloping land or repurposing land that they own. There are deed restrictions on replacement of homes here in the villages, citing the example of some type of natural disaster completely demolishes a house. You have to rebuild a home in that space. But no, is there really cause for concern here? Maybe because we're giving the example of the apartment buildings going up. I don't think that would be a circumstance that would be broadly adhered to. What I mean by that is I don't think that they're just going to tear down Nancy Lopez and build up, apartment buildings. I don't think that they're going to go into Cane Garden and the homes that are around those championship courses. I don't think they're just going to demolish that. The golf aspect of the community is too big of a draw to diminish it. They're finding out the hard way right now in the southern sections just how much pull golf still has. Even though it's not the only thing in the villages, it is a big pull. So to the residents and prospective future buyers, this is a risk assessment thing. I can't tell you with 100% certainty that you can't find yourself in a situation that would be undesirable like this. I kind of go back in my mind. There was a portion of Cameron Grove that backed up the farmland that wasn't owned by the community, and we had a lot of great homes. It was a cottage neighborhood. We had a lot of great homes for sale on that particular street, and the real challenge was everybody wanted some type of guarantee or reassurance that that farmland was going to remain this open pasture with cows in it. We can't give you that. The owner of that farmland can do whatever they want with it, so long as it's zoned that way. But I can't promise that that land isn't going to get rezoned for commercial usage. Who knows what the future holds in that case? So, as I understand it, that farmland is still farmland. That's not to say that can't change. But this is going to come down to your risk tolerance and what you find to be acceptable and what you can't stomach. And that's really all I can say on that one. All right, let's move on to the next one. Okay, I apologize. It looks like that was the last question present. Again, I would like to thank Tom in particular for investing the time in viewing the content, thinking about the content, and putting forth some really interesting and deep questions for us to wrestle with. I think that would probably be the highest compliment I've ever received, that you invested so much time. And in response, I wanted to take the time to answer those questions here in this video format. So, hey, listen, put your thoughts out there, put your feelings out there. The Insight series is designed to spark conversation. I hope that the information I was able to disseminate makes sense, and kind of answers those questions the best that I'm able to. Please continue to enjoy the Insight series, and we'll see you on the next go around. 2, 1.
Thanks for watching!